welcome today. I'm so excited to talk to you and Caleb. So, Oculus is the virtual reality industry leader today.
Mm-hmm.
Hot off the press, news that Oculus was renamed Facebook Reality Labs. Can you share with our Boise Startup Week audience what that means to the customer?
So it's a little bit of a misnomer, I'll be honest. Oculus is the product. It's the hardware we've developed that you get to use to experience virtual reality. And that name is not going to change, right? The hardware will still be referred to as the Oculus. The name change goes towards our larger AR, VR development department at Facebook. So Facebook Reality Labs now encompasses things like Instagram and the Oculus team and what we're doing with Spark AR and all of those pieces that go into extending your reality in all different degrees. So Oculus will remain as a name and a brand, but Facebook Reality Labs is now our home within Facebook.
Okay, thank you so much. Now, you are a science fiction writer. You have a novel coming out, Nucleation, very soon. Tell us a little bit about Nucleation.
So, Nucleation is a story about a woman who botches first contact, which, is first contact is one of those stories that science fiction and in particular space opera loves to embrace, this idea of two completely different groups coming together for the very first time. But the one thing that often gets passed over, and The Arrival, I think, did this very well, sort of as a side note, is that two different mindsets that evolve on two different planets in two different spaces may be unrecognizable to each other. And so in the context of the story, this miss is an understandable thing. And part of it comes about because in the future of nucleation, the robots go first, right? We use Waldos, we use remote presence. It's a world built off the way that we're exploring Mars right now, right? The idea that, you don't strap a person, on top of a Roman candle and fire them into space to go find something for the very first time. You're going to do this a little more measured. You're going to treat the lives as a little more valuable. And, VR was a key piece towards making that remote presence work in sort of a real-time, tense thriller style method.
All right. Well, I cannot wait for it to come out and learn more about it. So I'm going to tee up a couple of questions and really Caleb and Kimberly, you guys weigh in on this. So the first thought here is the technology of art. So in art and technology, they're often expressions of the same inner workings, just coming to life through different creative processes. They are complementary products in a lot of ways, and both are elevated by the presence of the other. So like working in games, finding ways to connect creative teams, engineering teams is always the first step towards getting a product on the road to development. So Kimberly, I'll ask you to go first and to just kind of touch on those thoughts.
So, building anything has steps, right? I mean, if you're building an IKEA couch, if you're creating a masterwork oil painting, if you're building a business, right? There's a process you go through in every case. You do your research, you figure out the best tools for the job, you figure out your end goal, and then you sort of walk backwards through a path to get there. And I think that the lessons that you learn about how to structure creative projects and the types of leaps you have to make when you're doing creative projects carries over to sort of the business and technological aspect of building corporations or of building products that are designed to go in the world. It's a very similar sort of intellectual process that you have to go through. And I found that, a lot of times people with a creative bent tend to do very well when it comes to, what they're building, when it comes to the business side of things. That mix seems to give us the best possible outcome.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I really like how technology can work with art. Like for me, I'd say it kind of helps enable art for me personally. So like, there's things that I want to do, and I envision some experience in my mind, but I don't know how to make it, and that's where technology comes into play. It makes it, much more possible and more interactive and real. And especially with virtual reality, it allows you to really immerse the player into a whole different environment, and it gives a lot more opportunity for the I guess you could almost call it a lot more opportunity for the artist to create and immerse the user. It's kind of cool. And even from like a technical perspective, I've run into a couple instances where technology has allowed me to do things that I just couldn't have done without it. For example, Photoshop has some simple tools that I use that allow me to create low poly images pretty easily. And it's just like allows me to basically average the colors underneath the selection and create this cool, interesting, abstract image out of a simple picture, and things like that. And it's kind of cool how technology can allow you to more creatively express yourself.
So the business model canvas is a great book that can be used, and I love that they call it a canvas, business model canvas. As I think about our creative class out there, creating games, AR, VR, creating novels, and that's really a great tool to use. So I encourage people to look at that as a tool to create from. And on a single page, you start to understand your customers and your markets and really, who's going to buy your product idea or art or game, and who's going to be part of your success. And Kimberly, you talked before about the different types of mindsets that come together to be on a team. You talk about, the engineering side, the business side. Can you share with me just a little bit more about that, the mix of inclusion and diversity at being really at top of mind when you're building a team and that team's strength?
Sure, absolutely. There tends to be, and I take some of this experience from game design, I take some of it from being a freelancer, but there tends to be like 4 key quadrants of putting together a team for building a product. You have your business development person who ideally is looking forward and who is looking towards the end goal and how to get there. You have the creative person who's really in charge of communication. Right, how to bring this product to life in the eyes of the users, of the viewers, of whoever needs to be directly interacting with this. You've got the engineering team who are responsible for making all the pieces go together, right, and making everything operate and act in the way that it ought to be. And then you've got the sound designers who are responsible for sort of enhancing that experience and backing up the communication of the artist as the product goes forward. Now, one of the things that I've run into, and I see this a lot with indie game development, is that you want some fudge around the edges of those roles. Ideally, your artist may have some technical skills, right? They understand how to build shaders, they understand how to connect with the engineering team to get the best result out of the engineering that they need. And the engineering team ideally should have a bit of a creative bent and understand some of the artistic tools and the final goals that the artist is trying to go to, so the engineering can help drive that forward in its best possible fashion. So, at the end of the day, while there are official roles and there are official separations between sort of what your primary goal is when you're building a product, having some ability to go back and forth and having some understanding of the project and the structure outside your particular piece goes a long way. And when we get into team building elements, oftentimes the more diverse your team is, the better, right? You may have an artist who is your creative mind, but that doesn't mean they're the only one doing the creating and the concepting. Right. Everybody's got great ideas. And in my experience, everybody is happy to tell the artist all about those great ideas. Right. And if those ideas are coming from many different sets of experiences, you get a much better product because it gives you some of that secret sauce that people haven't seen before. You want everybody to be a bit different because that's what helps give you something unique.
So let's move to the business of creativity. Thoughts on how the framework of creating a novel, a game, or a piece of art can parallel the framework of creating a business, even down to similar pitfalls?
So, there's a couple of things that I've noted doing this business for a while. One of the big hangups, and I see this most hardcore in art, but it also carries across to business, is this idea that whatever you're building has to be unique. And, unique is not what you want, really, right? I mean, there's a place for something that nobody's ever seen before, that nobody's ever thought of before. But unless you can tie that back to something people are familiar with, it's going to take a lot of extra work for you to land it. The way that business tends to work best and the way that creativity tends to work best is scaffolding off of things that have come before. You're building a better mousetrap rather than inventing the mousetrap. And so in both cases, you don't want to shy away from the history of what you're creating. You don't want to shy away from the things that have come before, but you don't want to slavishly copy either. You need to be willing to break those rules that are already laid down, and you need to be able to break those concepts. But if you don't have them, you can't break them. Right? You can't think outside the box unless you start with a box.
That's a big part of what we do, is how you'll build something and be, oh, this is perfect, this is great. And then you do some testing and realize there's a whole bunch of things wrong with it. So then you fix it and go back, try it again. And, then you go, after a couple iterations, you think you got it nailed, and then you show it to some other people that haven't seen it yet, and they show you stuff you didn't realize. And it's all a matter of getting all these different perspectives involved and getting as many different people's points of view involved as you realistically can. And then using that to, really help out and make a difference.
Kimberly, I liked when you were talking about nucleation and Helen, about how, she failed at first contact. And Caleb touched on that as well. And when we think about failure, it's not a failure if you learn from it. I think that we need to reverse our thoughts upon that and really embrace failure, champion the failures. And Kimberly, you had some thoughts about art and failure.
Absolutely. I mean, art is all about failure, and so is science, right? These processes are the same. You try something and it doesn't work, or it doesn't quite work, and then you need to take another step forward. In art, what we have is what they call sort of that serendipitous error, right? Something goes wrong. You have to repaint over a canvas. You you set your edit undo in Photoshop, so you only have 10 steps back, but the problem starts 12 steps back, right? There's all of these different sort of mini failures or mini problems that can pop up that, if you learn from them and you roll with them, can give you something truly unique. And in technology and in business, you see this similar process, right? We tend to call it a pivot, right? In entrepreneurial terms, where you get your product built and you go to market, and then COVID hits, and all of a sudden your market has changed, and you have to take what you have and figure out how to fit it into something new, right? And you may take the company this direction, you may take the company that direction, but you've been forced into a state of invention or of reinvention, which often gives us some of the coolest results.
I've definitely run into that as well on some of the team projects I've been on. We'll run into some issues and think that it's got to stop, and then we end up reinventing a better solution that was better than what we were originally trying to do a lot of times. And yeah, that ends up being pretty interesting, actually. Yeah, it's especially with the NASA Suits team, that happened to us a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Caleb, great segue into the ARCIS conversation. Your team at Boise State University had received a NASA grant on solving a big challenge and working on the spacesuit of the future. So share with us what you've done on the team and what's next for ARSIS.
Yeah, so I've been a part of the team for about a year, going on a year and a half now. So I've been around too long, but I've been around for a little while, and it's really interesting. So basically, the goal of the project is to build the prototype software that NASA is going to need for their ARSIS spacesuit that they're building right now. I believe that stands for Augmented Reality Space Informatics System. But basically, it's a big fancy word for they're going to have augmented reality built in their headset. Just making simple things like navigation to sampling, just a lot of different things like that a lot easier. But yeah, and the biggest thing is we're just building out based on the basic, like how would they solve these problems? Like for example, say they need to do a sample on the moon or something. Okay, how would they do that, and what would be the process, and how can we make that easier? But yeah, it's pretty cool. Like there's like a couple different functionalities, like one called telestration, where we've got a virtual reality headset, an augmented reality headset, and a computer, and they can all send notes back and forth to each other visually. So the VR person can draw, like a smiley face or something, or an arrow, and that'll pop up in the augmented reality point of view wherever they drew it. And then you can draw, directions and lines, places to go with the desktop computer app, stuff like that. Yeah, it's all about just basically, taking, almost gamifying real life, honestly.
Yes, and your team's all collaborating online now.
Yeah, actually, it's kind of funny. It actually ended up kind of helping us in a weird way because we had a lot of testing we had to do. And when everything got moved online, part of that testing was making sure our software worked at distance. So we were actually in 3 different areas all over the Treasure Valley working together at the same time, making sure everything worked. And it ended up being a really good way to test what we're building, actually. It's kind of nice.
Great. So question for you guys. How would you describe a day in the life of a VR gamer in the future? And what are some of the major differences from what the experience is like today? So put on your future lens. What will it be like? What is the future going to look like?
There's the current vision of the future is that we're going to have full haptic feedback suits, right? And omnidirectional treadmills, right? Sort of that Oasis type setup for anybody who's going to be gaming in the future. But one of the things that I keep running into is the power of the illusion of VR, right? And that there's a lot that VR can convince your brain that you're doing, even without needing all of those specific little feedback elements. So while I think that there's going to be a place for that kind of full setup, and we're already developing it, right? If you go on Amazon right now, you can see haptic feedback vests and feedback gloves and treadmills, and all these pieces are starting to come together. But I think that you're looking at in the far-flung future, I think we're looking at not needing all of that. I think we're going to settle on a fully immersive experience that's not as literally immersive as Hollywood has us looking for, which I actually think is a little bit cooler, right? The idea that you're able to get that level of depth and to feel like you're actually in a space without needing to go full astronaut, without needing to put on the helmet and the gloves and the jacket and the boots and the full, and hang yourself on wires and everything else. So I think it's, for a VR gamer, it's going to be very, it's going to continue to be very straightforward. You put your headset on, and ideally these are going to be smaller and lighter and faster and more power efficient, right? So really what you're going to do is put on your glasses, and then you're going to make a choice, right? Am I going to wear these as sunglasses? Am I going to push the button and have them go full dark virtual reality glasses? Am I going to go somewhere in between, right? And maybe go more towards an augmented reality scenario. I think the more of those options we can give people in a single unit, the more likely it is that everybody's going to have one.
So I really like the point you brought up about how it might not actually end up as fully immersive as some people think, just because we don't need it, and that's one of the things I've kind of been looking at a little bit is, people go, oh, we're going to get treadmills and we're going to get full haptic feedback and all this crazy stuff. It's going to be like you're there. I'm like, yeah, but it's already kind of like I'm there. to be honest. And it's not even, it doesn't even have half the senses yet. It just has visual and sometimes audio. Mm-hmm. And that's where, realistically, if we could just kind of define and refine how those things are done and how they're developed, it could be that we don't ever actually need, these omnidirectional treadmills, which are very difficult to try and figure out. And, it kind of makes things a lot easier. And then I like how you mentioned how they're going to be mixed, because that's one thing that I think is definitely probably going to happen eventually, is the mixing of both the augmented and virtual into one headset, because that just allows you to do a lot more. And I feel like the potential for augmented reality could be really, really interesting. I mean, things where as simple as say you want to play a game or something, and you could overlay things with the environment you're in, or even just maps like directions. I mean, Google Maps already has a variation of it where you can do augmented reality maps and it shows a line directing you where to go in front of you. And, it's things like that that make just general ease of use changes.
What does the future taste like?
This is one of my favorite metaphors is, virtual reality is, it's like an artificial strawberry, right? When you're in it, it looks and feels and tastes perfectly real, right? It's what you think of as real, but the real world is like the real strawberry. And when you transition back out, when you compare them side by side, they're actually two very different things, right? They speak to each other and they inform each other, but one is not ultimately going to replace the other. It's the strawberry gummy versus the strawberry, as opposed to strawberry A and strawberry B. And I think the more we lean into that and lean into this idea that virtual reality is more like a hyper reality than a literal, version of reality, I think we're going to be able to go farther faster, sort of following that idea.
So with that, Caleb, how do people find out more about you?
Oh, yes. So I've got my website is one easy place. Also, pretty much anywhere on social media. Just go by my first and last name, Caleb Cran. You'll probably find me on there. But yeah, and if you're curious in seeing any professional work I do, my website's probably the easiest place because it's got links to my GitHub, my YouTube, pretty much everything. So yeah, social media and all that. So yeah, that's probably the easiest place.
Excellent. And Kimberly, how do people find out more about you and about nucleation and all the cool things you're working on with Oculus?
So for my personal stuff, as I like to say, for my avocation, my website's the best place to go. And that's ungerinc.com, UNGERINK, as in ink and paint. And everything goes there eventually. There's links to my mobile games. There's links to my VR stuff. And of course, at the big top is, the links for nucleation, which comes out in November of this year. So we're almost there, which is very exciting.
It is exciting. That is so exciting. Well, thank you both for your time today. I appreciate you both for sharing what the future may look like and taste like and feel like. And goodbye for now.
Bye. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys.